It is not enough to achieve the change needed to create a truly inclusive workplace.
Tonight, Canada's Auditor General looks at inclusion policies across government departments.
This is the prime example of how systems and policies cannot follow through. If we have point of orders and everything is delayed.
Plus, a House committee to look at land back goes off track.
A loaf of bread is like almost $4, $5 today, and this is cheaper.
And a First Nation in Manitoba takes youth back to the land. Good evening, Tansianin. Welcome to APTN National News. I'm Daryl Stranger. Canada's Auditor General released a new report on Thursday. It examines racial inclusion and diversity policies across 6 government organizations. The report finds the government is doing little to monitor or measure whether or not these policies are actually working. APTN's Fraser Needham has more.
Karen Hogan says the Trudeau government has to do more than a simple commitment to diversity hiring.
It is not enough to achieve the change needed to create a truly inclusive workplace. For that change to happen, departments need to actively engage with their racialized employees, to meaningfully use the data they have to inform decisions, and to hold their leadership accountable for delivering change.
The auditor's report looks at inclusion programming in organizations such as Correctional Services, Canada Border Services, and the RCMP. Finds there is little to no measurement of performance or progress. Management is not evaluated on the implementation of these policies, and racialized employees reported feeling the government does not take inclusion, diversity, and equity in the workplace seriously enough. The report also finds complaints of discrimination in departments like Canada Border Services and Correctional Services remain stagnant. These graphs show that for visible minorities, the blue bars, racial discrimination did not significantly change between 2018 and 2020. Hogan says this all needs to change. And it needs to start with Treasury Board effectively measuring success across all government departments. Treasury Board Minister Anita Anand agrees.
We are heading up 250,000 employees in the public service across the country, and it is the logical place for that leadership to occur. We need to make sure we are continuing to support those individuals who are already in the public service, who are racialized or in any other minority category.
She also admits the government has to create a culture where racialized employees believe complaints of discrimination will lead to meaningful change.
So we're striving for a world, whether it's government or any other institution, where that view is no longer present, and it's going to take time. We will address it through the proactive reforms.
In all, the Auditor General released a total of 5 reports on Thursday, including ones on government progress on modernizing technology systems and improving wait times for those seeking permanent residency. Fraser Needham, APTN National News, Ottawa.
The Standing Committee on Indigenous and Northern Affairs met with more witnesses Thursday as it continued its study of the impacts of land being taken away from Indigenous people. But it got off to a rocky start as Conservative MP Arnold Viersen introduced a motion that had nothing to do with Indigenous lands. Before the Q&A part of the session began, Viersen interrupted. He wanted committee members to pass a motion telling Parliament to immediately obey a Supreme Court decision from last week, when the court ruled that the way Ottawa assesses the environmental impact of major infrastructure projects like pipelines is unconstitutional. NDP MP Lori Idlout accused the Conservatives of sidetracking the discussion. She compared the Conservatives' motion to land having been stolen in the past to now having them steal study time on the topic of land back. With 12 minutes wasted, witness Graham Marshall expressed his disappointment.
just in observance of the standing committee today and the colleagues throughout the table, throughout the point of order, this is the prime example of how systems and policies cannot follow through. If we have point of order.
A bill that aims to make significant changes to the Indian Act is winding its way through the House of Commons. Bill C-38 was introduced for second reading on Friday. The legislation deals largely with the issue of enfranchisement, because at one time First Nations people were forced to give up their status in order to vote in Canadian elections or join the military. The bill seeks to give them and their descendants the same status and rights as those who were not enfranchised. Here's what New Brunswick Liberal MP Jenica Atwin had to say about the legislation.
If all enfranchisement issues are addressed, approximately 3,500 people could be newly eligible for registration with these amendments. These proposed changes represent significant and meaningful action to the affected people and their families. They also demonstrate to Indigenous peoples a steady and forward movement by Canada to make amends to the many ways colonial laws and actions intentionally harmed them and their communities.
All right, we have to take a short break here on the show. Our Truth and Politics panel is coming up right after the break. Welcome back. Well, Canada has its first Treaty Indian provincial premier. Wam Kanu was elected Premier of Manitoba October the 3rd. His government was sworn in on Wednesday. Our regular Truth and Politics panel, Carrie Benjo and Nigon Sinclair, joined Dennis Ward to discuss what it all means now that the work of governing is about to start.
Carrie, Nigan, great to have you with us as always. Nigan, let's start with you. Big expectations here for Wabkanu and this new government. Some saying the honeymoon's already over. It's only been a day, but what happens now?
Well, I don't know if the honeymoon's quite over yet, but I mean, I've been getting tweets all day about how people are really proud of Manitoba, the most diverse cabinet in Canadian history. But now the work really does begin, and it's healthcare. And everyone's going to talk about healthcare, and that's important. It's certainly the issue that Deputy Premier Asaguera will be taking care of. But, you know, the untold story of the cabinet is the fact that Wabkanu appointed himself as Minister of Indigenous Reconciliation. And the fact is that they're going to have to pay for these changes in healthcare. They do have a $200 million surplus. And so they're going to have some money to start out the changes, but they're going to need, you know, upwards of $1 billion to be able to deal with the issue of healthcare. And that means that Premier Canoe is going to be investing himself within lithium, for example, or moving in the areas of trying to deal with the issue of Manitoba Hydro and making Manitoba Hydro cost efficient. And so what does that mean? That means that there's a reason that he appointed himself as Minister of Indigenous Reconciliation, is that he's interested in lands and resources. And so that's going to be a very tricky thing, I think, for Wabkanu to navigate.
Indeed. Carrie, a province over there, what were people saying about all this in the election and yesterday?
Everybody is so hyped. They're so proud to see an Indigenous person up there wear his headdress, address in the Indigenous languages from the province. In general, though, although people are very proud of what happened in Manitoba, in Saskatchewan, it's very different. We don't have a Wabkanu here. We don't have people in the position where we could be electing an Indigenous premier. We don't have nearly enough MLAs who are Indigenous to even think of accomplishing what Manitoba has. And I was really interested in watching the reaction from the politicians here after Wab's win. And there was really a lack of interaction, a lack of support that I seen from all parties, the NDP, the Sask Party. The leadership did send out a tweet, but it was basically silence. The only people that were celebrating were First Nations and Métis people.
Nigan, the First Nations. Women have been appointed to cabinet as well here. A number of First Nations and Métis will be in this cabinet. What are the expectations, do you think, on them as well?
Well, we could talk about all the different appointees to cabinet, and I think we should, and I think in the coming days we absolutely should. But we have to really focus now on Minister Smith, Bernadette Smith. She's got a very tricky portfolio because it's an invented portfolio. It's a new portfolio. It's to deal with addictions, housing, and the issue of mental health and the issues of homelessness. I mean, they want to address the issue of ending chronic homelessness. The NDP have invested themselves to put all the chips in the middle. This was one of the linchpins of what Premier Canoe said. And so is Minister Smith ready? She's done certainly a lot of grassroots work. She's famously been involved with heading up Drag the Red here in Winnipeg. And of course, she has a long history of the issue of murder missing Indigenous women and girls, having a family member that's been impacted by that. But is Minister Smith got a plan to be able to deal with what is a gargantuan of an issue, almost bigger than healthcare in lots of different ways, is the issue of homelessness? I mean, trying to get all the different bodies for the first time in history under one ministry, trying to get all of the different social agencies, for example, in downtown, many of whom are Christian, many of whom have different political stripes, people who have operated in silos for a long period of time. How do you get them together into a room? And I think that's the challenge for the new minister.
Lots of challenges for the Canoe NDP government here. Carrie, what do you see as some measures that can be taken to improve the lives of Indigenous peoples, especially children and youth?
The first step is listening, treating Indigenous people like human beings. I think that's the bottom line here. All too often we hear groups coming forward and having to protest just to get their voice heard because no one is listening. And I think that in order for this change to happen, to have maybe this era of reconciliation actually happen, we need to have Indigenous voices, the Métis voices, the First Nations voices at the table and actually be heard, not just as, you know, a token, you know, like, oh, we have somebody here from this group. No, but actually listening to people who are on the grounds, the grassroots, the people that know the issues, maybe giving them an opportunity to speak and come up with some solutions that maybe all these educated people in their reports really can't seem to grasp. You know, they're working directly with people who are impacted by addictions, by houselessness, and all those issues. And maybe those are the people that can have ideas that maybe would help. And I think just treating Indigenous people, like human beings with a voice, I think that would pave the way for this idea of reconciliation.
Carrie and Egon, we'll have to leave it there. Appreciate you both being here.
Yeah, you guys, thanks.
We've stepped aside one final time here on the show. We'll look at tonight's APTN Investigates is coming up. Welcome back. It's time now for our photo of the day. From Norway House Cree Nation in northern Manitoba, Toby Wilson sent in this amazing sunset as seen from her balcony. That's a stunning view. Toby, thanks so much for that. If you get a great photo this weekend, send it to share@aptn.ca for the chance to be featured next week during our photo of the day segment. Right now, let's take a look at tomorrow's weather forecast. Starting on the East Coast, 15 in St. John's and 18 in Halifax. 14 degrees in Cartwright and 14 in Happy Valley Goose Bay. 15 degrees in Quebec City and 16 in Montreal. Some showers and 13 in Toronto and 13 in Ottawa. 6 degrees in Timmins and 8 in Sioux Lookout. 1 degree up in Churchill and 5 in some showers in Thompson. 12 degrees in Barons River and rain in 13 in Winnipeg. 12 degrees in Swift Current and 10 in Saskatoon. 10 as well in Buffalo Narrows, and Stony Rapids is looking at 1 degree. Continuing west, 0 degrees in Fort Chipewyan and 6 in Peace River. 11 degrees in Edmonton and 11 as well in Calgary. 15 degrees in Campbell River and 10 in Quesnel. 11 degrees in Prince Rupert and 1 in Fort Nelson. -6 in Watson Lake and -6 in Whitehorse. Clear and -4 in Fort Simpson and -3 in Yellowknife. -6 in Colville Lake and -7 in Fort McPherson. 1 degree in Baker Lake and -3 in Cambridge Bay. -8 in Resolute and -5 in Iqaluit. Saugeen Anishinaabe Nation's junior high students learned how to harvest meat and do traditional crafts at their annual land-based harvest week. Sam Jonesa went to see what the kids were learning and how it helps their education.
Put them in a smoker, they smoke them for two days, I think.
It was an exciting week at the junior high school in Saugeen Anishinaabe Nation, north of Winnipeg. Students learned how to fillet and cook sturgeon at the school's annual land-based harvest week.
Remember I was showing you, look, go like this, look, don't be scared, he's dead.
What it takes to prepare deer.
So we're teaching the kids how to take the meat out and how to cut it up and how to skin it.
And how to make different types of bannock.
A loaf of bread is like almost $4, $5 today. And this is cheaper. It's cheaper to do it this way, and also the kids enjoy doing it, so it gives them some kind of sense of pride of making it, because
surviving, and once they go on their own, if they know how to make bannock, I always tell them, always buy the ingredients for bannock. You'll never go wrong, you'll never go hungry.
The land-based harvest week has taken place for over 40 years. It helps prevent cultural loss. Alan Crashane is a teacher at the school and previously a principal in the community.
I want our kids to learn their traditions because they'll know who they are and what community they're from and what kind of practices we did, and they're still continue on that process of harvesting our ways of life.
Beadwork helps teach patience and perseverance. Beadwork teacher Marcia Brouillet says it's a skill she wishes she learned when she was their age.
It makes me happy when I see their projects coming along, when they're getting closer, I just get so happy and excited for them.
Students learn geometry and sewing while making 8-point star pillow shams.
It's always an inspiration to watch our kids grow and learn and be interactive with these kinds of activities. It's something positive. They're engaged. They're, you watch them struggle through trying to learn something new and letting them know that it's okay to make mistakes and have fun, laugh at yourself and making mistakes, and that it's okay.
Painting was a creative way to learn about the 7 sacred teachings with artist and teacher Chloe Crashane.
Our 7 sacred teachings are very sacred in our culture. So I want to let them know, all the generations know that what it's for.
Alan Crashane says these skills will be used throughout the students' lives.
If you expose them to art and some traditional art that they've never tried, maybe we'll have some good artists, or else it brings out different characteristics in their regular life. Like maybe some of them want to be like some of the kids were having, they just love filleting or fishing. Maybe that is something for them to work at, or maybe they'll become a chef. So all of the stuff that we do for all these events that we do, it enhances some of their skills, and maybe it opens somebody's mind that they want to do one of those traditions.
No matter what they choose to do when they're older, for now, the kids get to have fun learning with their friends.
All our children get together, doesn't matter the grade level of what grade they're in, but they all intermingle, and so now you're building friendships, and not only with friendships, learning how to do things that are important to our community.
Sam Jonesa, APTN National News, Saugeen Anishinaabe Nation.
APTN Investigates returns tonight with an all-new episode. After decades of lobbying, 4 communities in Vermont have been recognized by the state as Abenaki. But Abenaki in Quebec are calling the process flawed and alleging that the groups are committing cultural identity theft on their ancestral territory. With more on the story, we are joined now by investigative journalist Tom Fenario. Tom, it's always a pleasure to speak with you. First off, what made you want to take on this story?
Well, there's lots of stories these days about Indigenous identity and folks who may or may not be profiting from pretending to be Indigenous. We all know the examples of some very famous ones out there. But what intrigued me about this one is that these groups in Vermont that are calling themselves Abenaki have been recognized by the state of Vermont as Abenaki. So there is a legitimacy to that. However, they're not being recognized by other people such as Abenaki in Quebec or even the US federal government. So there's blurred lines there. So that right away, that kind of got me. And also, when you meet these groups, it's interesting in the sense that they've been around since the 70s, so now you're getting into several generations of people who are into Abenaki culture. They do things like language preservation, so it's not always so typical or as obvious as it being for their own personal gain. Although that being said, they are eligible to get grants, they do have tax breaks, there's a cultural cachet. It comes to being Abenaki in Vermont now. So I like contrasts and stories, and man, this story's got a few of those, so that's why I just decided to dive into it.
Well, so then how are the Vermont recognized Abenaki defending their claims?
Well, they have 2 kind of major strikes going against their claims, and that is basically genealogy and census records show that if any of them do have Indigenous ancestry, it's really far down the line, like going back to the 1600s. So it kind of raises the question of I don't have to explain to our audience how blood quantum can be very complicated, and it's, especially if the ugly history of colonialism can be the difficult thing to get into. So I guess when we're talking about Indigenous identity, we like to see sort of like a living community, a living culture. And so a lot of the Abenaki that have been recognized by Vermont, we get into this idea of well, where is your living culture? Where is your living community if the blood quantum isn't really so obvious, right? And they get into sort of some difficult topics of having to hide their identity, hide who they were, some familiar stories I think most Indigenous people can relate to. And I guess the question is sort of are they weaponizing things like oral history and Indigenous trauma, or are they in fact victims of some of these things?
Well, a lot of really good questions there, Tom. So where do you see this story going in the future then?
Man, it's certainly not over, that's for sure. There is an elected official in New Hampshire, which is part of the ancestral territory of the Abenaki, who is a part of one of these Vermont groups, and she is looking into getting recognition in New Hampshire. So it could be spreading to other parts of New England as we speak. There's also a Truth and Reconciliation committee that is starting up in Vermont regarding the eugenics movement, which is the movement that led to many of these groups saying they had to go underground. And there's a bit of controversy there. People saying, well, these folks are not Abenaki, therefore they weren't affected by eugenics. And so, but of course, they would say that is not true. And so it's just gonna keep going from there. And I'll keep an eye on it. It's a little soon to say if there's gonna be an update, but it's definitely got places to go.
Well, we'll certainly keep an eye on it as well, Tom. Tom, thanks so much for this.
Thanks for having me, Daryl.
Reminder, you can catch People of the Dawn just a few moments from now. And that is all we have for you on this Friday edition of APTN National News. For news anytime, head to our website, aptnnews.ca. For all of us here, thank you so much for joining us. Miigwech, International Attendant, have a great night.